All right. Hi, everyone. Let me do some pinning. Here we go. My name is Alicia Murnick. I am here with representing Schools Beyond Screens, which is a coalition of LAUSD parents and teachers advocating for classroom technology that's student-centered rather than corporate sponsored, and finding ways to be more intentional about tech use and tech exposure in our schools. Um, I personally have also I taught K-12 for 15 years. I now teach teacher preparation programs at Cal State Northridge and Cal Arts, and I've been a teacher for almost 20 years now, and I have been a parent for 6.5, and I have been an LAUSD parent for 2 years. And in my daughter's kindergarten classroom, I learned that she was being required to spend a certain amount of time on the iPad. Now, being Dr. Becky mom, I had learned through, you know, all of the social media I had consumed to be very critical of tech. With my kids, with screen time particularly. So I had bought that like book of how to raise your kids 0 to 5, and it was very, very clear about what and when screen time was appropriate and when it was detrimental. And so when I learned that my kindergartner was being required to spend time on a device that we had worked very, very hard to keep out of our home, I became very curious about why. And ended up on the Curriculum Associates website looking through their efficacy clean claims. Um, since I dabble in academia, it became very clear to me very quickly that there were some claims being made that weren't truly backed up by the research. And I am ecstatic that Dr. Benjamin Solomon is here today to talk about his independent research and specifically about the efficacy of iReady standardized assessments, but also instructional minutes, hopefully, if we have that time. And Benjamin, I'm sorry, Dr. Solomon, would you like to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. And before we begin, I just also want to give credit to my graduate student, now Dr. Kayla Campana, who was the first author on this study. It was actually her dissertation.
Oh, good.
Um, she's a school psychologist in New Jersey right now, and I just want to make sure she gets the credit she deserves for this. But anyway, I'm Dr. Benjamin Solomon. I'm a school psychologist and professor at the University at Albany. It's a very long name, State University of New York. So University at Albany, SUNY. I've been there for 10 years, and my areas of specialty really are math assessment and math intervention. I'm very into evidence-based practice and trying to really advocate both locally and nationally that schools adopt practices, both assessment practices and instructional practices, that have a preponderance of evidence, especially in this day and age where we're really within a math crisis, both within New York and nationally. I know a little bit what's going on in California. I have a colleague over there, Linda Diamond, um, who I know is works very advocates for good practice over there. And I do a lot of work with her, so she tells me a little bit about what's going on in California, with legislation.
Hmm.
I'm here to learn, so I'll take your questions about that, and I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. And in terms of legislation and policy, Schools Beyond Screens and parents supporting teachers have really been arm in arm working to get smarter policy in California. And I think after this session, we are hoping to share out the recording as well as we've kind of written out a document with a link to your article, link to our websites. Um, and a little bit more information and articles about that policy fight and what the attendees in this room can do to bring that fight to their own districts. All right, so let's dive into the research. For parents who are seeing our kids taking these iReady multiple assessments multiple times a year, can you explain what a computer adaptive test really is, what it's trying to do, and why schools have been so attracted to them?
Yeah, sure. So iReady is, as you mentioned, a computer adaptive test, which is a family of tests of which there are many. There's a number of vendors, whether it be NWAA or STAR or MAP. There's many, and they operate in a very specific way based on algorithms that were developed actually decades ago. And what these algorithms try to do is through iterative testing, through a very, very, very large question bank, they try to precisely identify where a kid is in terms of their performance relative to a normative group. And sometimes for some students, those tests can be shorter because basically through a question tree, they nail right in on where that kid is, especially sort of if they're in the middle range, because that's where a lot of the distribution is, where a lot of the questions are.
Hmm.
But if they're much lower, much higher, sometimes it can take a little bit longer because it's got to really work its way through to declare itself stable. Because of that weird logic, these are necessarily computer-based tests, right? Because they have to go through that chain and students
Yeah.
get different questions. Originally, these were more sort of developed for, I think, high stakes tests, and we can think about like, GRE, SAT, but they sort of got down, pushed down in the technology got pushed down into eventually elementary school.
Hmm.
I like to distinguish these tests from what I call fixed form tests, which are more traditional tests that are paper based that historically students have taken. There's a specific form of fixed form test called curriculum based measurement. That's what I research.
Hmm.
Curriculum based measurement are very brief. Usually in the math world, we're talking 1 to 2 minutes. Fluency based, meaning they track
Yeah.
they're scored for accuracy and speed and on core skills within mathematics. Again, they take usually no longer than 1 to 3 minutes. It's sort of scaled based on the complexity of what they're sol of what the problems are,
Right.
one by one addition versus, I don't know, least common denominator. This is a very different form of test, but that's what I study, and we found they're incredibly useful. They A, are very quick, B, are incredibly valid, and three, importantly, instructionally useful. So I like to distinguish that from the computer adaptive test. The computer adaptive tests produce a score that can be hard to interpret. The scale depends on the test. Let's pretend it goes from 0 to 1,000. It's a range. It's a numerical value. And students may be a 300, a 400, a 500, a 600, a 70. You've probably seen this on your students' score reports. They're sort of hard to interpret, right? That's called
Hmm.
a vertically scaled score. So that's a numerical range that may start in kindergarten or first, then goes all the way to the top of the testing ceiling.
Right.
Maybe in seventh and
Right.
eighth grade. So, and the idea, of course, is we want students to basically ratchet up those numbers as they go up grades. And we count on the test to tell us whether those students are doing so in sort of a educationally, developmentally appropriate way, right? I'm making this up. It depends on the measure, but maybe we expect a kindergartner to be a 300, but then a first grader to be a 400, then a second grader to be a 500, right? And we're
Hmm.
counting on the test to say, hey, that's not good. We want him to be up here. Or, hey, that is good. He's way above where we want him to be. I personally find those numbers actually pretty hard to interpret. They don't tell us a lot about what students actually know. They just indicate risk. And that is the
Oh, that's
primary purpose
interesting.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think this is again related to a lot of the criticisms that I've heard about this, the iReady assessments, and especially those iReady path experiences where students can't actually go back and see where they struggled. There isn't transparency even for the teachers in classrooms to go back and see like which exact questions. Like you get the general kind of like which standards were hit, which standards we're struggling with, but
Yeah.
you can't see the actual question which
I
again, I feel like I'm going to be going on so many tangents, but I
That's
want to
okay.
yeah, go ahead if you want
No,
to.
no, I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Each of these tests are a little bit different, and how they break down how students actually responded question by question is different. So I don't want to make a blanket statement in terms of what all the tests report or don't report, but it
Mm-hmm.
is the case that parents and teachers and administrators and school psychologists can struggle mightily with understanding where the kids struggled or didn't struggle based on which questions they answered because they sort of clump all those questions together. And as you pointed out, a lot of those questions are proprietary, so they don't want to reintroduce them. in a printed format. So there's a lot of questions, pointed questions about what we might call the instructional utility or the treatment utility of these measures. Can we actually use the data to predict what intervention or adjustment in instruction a given
Right,
kid or classroom needs, which to me is the gold standard,
right,
right? That's
right,
what teachers really need to know, not whether their students are all at risk or not at risk. They need to be like, okay, based on this pattern of scores, what should I do? What
right.
content needs to be reviewed? How do I dial up instruction and in what areas? And these computer adaptive tests have really struggled to deliver on that in that domain.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is really the sales pitch, right? And this is I didn't encounter any of these sales pitches until I tried to get my child out of the mandate, right? I said I'd like to opt out my child. She's above grade level. I don't like we don't need to worry about it. You're tier one school. Like I just don't want to do it. And I don't want her involved because I don't trust the claims that are being made about how meaningful and how effective it is. But within our school sites, the teachers, administrators, they've all received training from the company. They've all received not only the initial sales pitch that somebody in the district shook hands, signed this giant contract, but now every single school site has been receiving professional development about the efficacy of these tools. And the argument being made is this is going to help you differentiate instruction. That's the goal, right? It's we want to see who are our struggling students so that we can swoop in and support and reteach who we need. Now, as a teacher and someone who's been teaching through No Child Left Behind, through Every Student Succeeds Act, there is a long history of overassessing kids and of trying to outsource that differentiation. And in my experience, none of it holds a candle to that true kind of universally designed instruction with a little bit of that culturally responsive, relationship informed differentiation. It's sort of satisfying to hear this study kind of point out what feels so obvious to so many of us, which is that a computer cannot differentiate for your kid in the same way that a human teacher can.
100% agree. Having data in a school is important, right?
Mhm.
There's been good studies showing that when we have high quality data that does inform intervention and we train the system on how to use that data, it can result in more accurate decisions. However, that doesn't necessarily mean we can lump every single assessment tool under the sun and say, sure, yeah, more data, it all helps. Yeah, great, you'll make better decisions. The one thing I like, not the one thing, one of many things I like about curriculum-based measurement is it's in very brief. It assesses pivotal skills. It requires the students to do immediate recall and demonstrate fluency.
Yeah.
It results in a score that is intuitive to understand. This student answered in 1 minute or 2 minutes, five, seven, 10 problems correct. That's not fast enough. I need to work on this. And because you have those permanent products, you can go back and be like, hey, he didn't regroup on this problem. There we go. I need to reteach this skill.
Yeah.
Because those measures are so quick, they minimize the loss of instructional time. Um, and you can sort of I think it was Mark Shin who coined this phrase. I could be wrong. Test less and then obsess. We have way too much data in schools, which you very rightfully pointed out. It can be very confusing for parents. It can be very confusing for teachers because they don't know what direction to go.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, these computer adaptive tests generate too much data when you actually need very little to make good decisions. You do need it, but you really, there's clear paths there. So overall, we are sort of drowning in data, as I say. And it is sort of unnecessary.
Absolutely. And so going back to the study a little bit, the sort of conclusion or big takeaway was you focused on comparing the iReady assessments, the beginning of year assessment, correct, with
Yep.
the previous year's uh, state standardized testing that is already required. And you found that the previous year's standardized testing was actually more accurate than the beginning of the year iReady assessment. So were you surprised that this kind of naturally occurring data beat out this high tech, this high tech algorithm?
Not super surprised, right? Because the big caveat here is that the state test has the advantage because one state test is predicting another state test, right?
Hmm.
So there's a structural similarity between those two data points that gives them an advantage. Now,
Yeah.
with that said, that doesn't remove the big question of then why are we doing extra testing in the fall, right? Those state tests are really important. Those are objective, standardized, criteria in terms of how students are doing. If your student is obviously the tests vary by state, and states set different benchmarks, and we really need to dig into where they set that benchmark.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, on average, they are pretty predictive of how students do later on. So we really should be focusing on that data. Um, so they're important, but if we're going to add more assessment, we want it to have some kind of what we might call incremental sort of validity, right?
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
additional predictive validity, adding on to that in some kind of way because it's more testing. And in this situation, it doesn't. Now, compounding that is what I said a few minutes ago, which is these tests sort of struggle to show where teachers should pivot on instruction,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So its primary purpose is to identify risk status. But if it, as you pointed out, if it doesn't do that any better than the prior year state test, which again is not wholly unexpected, but nevertheless, that is what's happening, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
the question becomes, why are we doing it if we can really come into the fall, right, and make our groups do our plan of attack so that we can A, apply either tier one interventions to raise all class performance if we're seeing a tier one problem, which is pretty common right now in math, right? It's not like we have individual students who are struggling in math. We have 60-70% of our students struggling in math.
Yeah.
So you need to really address it at the instruction and curriculum level for all students. But assuming that's not the case, okay, we have these students coming in. We know it from the fall because the state test scores usually come in, August, that they're at risk. What are we going to do for them? Adding the iReady on top of that, at least based on our one study, I don't want to overblow it. It's not the final truth, but would suggest that adding that additional risk factor on top of the prior year state test doesn't really help you that much and doesn't improve accuracy. And frankly, may spark confusion because if you have one say the kid's at risk and the other say the kid's not at risk, what do you do? So,
I
yeah.
I love what you just said, not the final truth, right? You're saying this is just one study, this, the limited data set, single location, single thing we looked at. That is so researcher, right? To be like, it's not the ultimate truth. Now, I'm very interested in the difference between that positioning and what we see on the Curriculum Associates website and in their trainings and their sales materials about the inarguable validity and accuracy and success and usefulness of these products. So, again, as somebody who dapples in academia, speaking to somebody who actually finished and got your papers, um, what is the difference between the type of research that is being used to argue for iReady and MyPath's incredible use and the kind of methods and quality of research that you and your students are doing at SUNY?
Yeah. Curriculum Associates is a vendor. So they have a motivation to produce research that favors their own position and get it out in the public because they're trying to draw sales. And that's not a criticism. That's what all vendors really do, to different degrees. So I'd have to go back and look at their research, but what I know I've seen a lot of and how I see they pitch, because they're very present in New York. Um, And so I know based on personal experience, a lot of the way they pitch the success is through students' improvement within their own system.
Yeah.
Um, this student went up X amount of levels. This student, they'll sometimes some of the vendors, I'd have to double check on iReady, even use time in the program as a success criteria,
Yeah.
which is curious. So they're using what we may call proximal measures, right? They're basically, hey, we're going to create the goalposts and then we're going to measure how well we kick into them, right? That is in And they're not obviously experimental studies. Vendors don't have a huge incentive to engage in experimental studies. And what I mean by experimental, and I'm sure many people know this, is really randomized control trials, right?
Yeah.
Which is very critical in medicine, but equally, if not more important, in education, because there's so many products. We have a replicability crisis. It tends to be when independent researchers using rigorous designs test out these theories and programs and assessments, they come out looking far less shiny than they would within, the research of the person or company who created it. So, overall, I haven't seen a lot of rigorous research on iReady. What I
Hmm.
have seen is program evaluations, which is weak evidence. And I've seen a lot of them basically touting improvement within a measurement system they created, but we don't really know whether it correlates well to what we may call distal measures, high stakes measures, like, hey, these
Hmm.
students were on this program for 3 years. Look, now 80% of these students are passing the state exam. I
Yeah.
haven't seen a statement like that based on rigorous methods.
Right. And it doesn't exist. So on their website, there's kind of the only two sort of public studies that they reference on their website. I'm going to get so in the weeds here. I'm sorry, y'all. Is that the John Hopkins study,
Yeah.
which again, it's time spent practicing iReady translates to better performance on iReady assessments. There's no transference over into those state tests. The other big one that they use is the Miami-Dade public schools system, which they were we have some political connections to Miami-Dade and LAUSD recently, but the it was a correlational study. Um, Again, just looking at like task completion correlates with students doing better on our own assessments also. So it's entirely internal, like if you practice with the little Duolingo owl, you will gain new levels and points. Like that's it. That's all their research, right? And then they've got a whole bunch of other like stronger phrased findings that are vendor funded and vendor commissioned. Often vendor authored. So they have a lot of blog posts by their own employees working under third party consultants. And they reference those in a way on their website to make it look like they are referencing real research, but they are not. So I am always disappointed by how easily our public school systems are swayed by large companies like this making claims that are not always accurate. And so I really appreciate getting some this emerging research in the field that is kind of like let's like zoom out. Let's zoom out and have somebody who is not on payroll look at this. And really figure out if it's worthwhile or not. I wish that that was happening across the nation before signing giant contracts because, as you mentioned, and as our questions are going into, is there's a cost, right? And the cost of doing iReady with our kids is you wrote about $7.25 a student in New York City at this time per subject, plus the cost of training teachers, plus the cost of instructional minutes for our kids. So
That's the big one, right? A
I want to
lot
hear you
of
go off, go off. So I want to hear all about that. Like, what is the opportunity cost here?
huge, right? There's a financial cost, fair, and it's sizable. Um, but for me, that's a rounding error on the kid's instructional time, right? There's 6.5 hours in a school day. there's probably half that much actual instructional time in a school day. Kids are in school 180 days a year, right? That is really valuable time. Minutes matter. And so when you have these kids on a computer adaptive instructional program that has very questionable evidence, sometimes for 30 minutes or an hour or more a day, that's just the opportunity cost there is enormous. And that's the part that really frustrates me. There's that time, can really set a kid on a very different path if used wisely.
Right.
Can I interject here? There's been a couple of questions that I think are connected to
Yes, bring
this
them in.
line. Great. So, first is a question I think it was from Paul Roback who asked, has Curriculum Associates responded at all to your research?
Oh, no. To be fair, I didn't expect them to. I'm a little guy. But no.
Not
You know,
anymore.
yeah. Yeah, and obviously, I know the Digital Delusion is a very popular book right now. It's bringing awareness to some very critical issues, and I know Jared Coney Horvath cited my study in one of his Substacks that got a lot of attention. So that may bring it to light a little to the point where they feel they may need to respond. But as far as I know, and obviously I'm not in their inner loop, I don't believe there's been an official response.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not surprising. Thank you for saying that. And then two, Danielle Ehrenfeld in the chat asked if you all, whether it was the research you have done, or if are you hearing from folks in your field who are doing research about the like emotional, psychological, spiritual impact of something like iReady and how it's making children feel about school?
Oh, that's a course name right there. So I don't know if we have the time for that one, but I will say that we can take let's talk about domain general and domain specific answers to that question. Domain general, and I'm going a little outside my area of expertise, so I want to be super careful here. There has been research showing that kids that are overexposed to technology and screens, right? There are negative outcomes associated just with that volume right there. These programs are designed to provide, immediate gratification. They're designed to be heavily gamified, and that can condition students to sort of, expect that in their everyday life. And again, we're outside my area, so I'm trying to be careful, but nevertheless, that's a concern right there, is just the platform itself. Now let's go to the program specifically, right? When students struggle in math, they tend to know it, and there's this myth that tests cause math anxiety. Tests do not cause math anxiety. Being bad at math causes math anxiety. And then when students are presented with a math test on something they know they're already very bad at, they show anxiety. So putting kids through a program that is ineffective and does not actually improve their mathematical proficiency is probably going to generate anxiety and frustration and aversion when they are compelled to do math in other areas. It also may generate confusion because these programs are designed to be reinforcing. They don't provide a lot of feedback to students in terms of how they're actually progressing. They don't go back and rehearse key lessons that the students are struggling on. So you have students that are sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I guess I'm doing okay, but then they struggle in other areas. That is going to generate a lot of sort of emotional, in my experience, on average, a lot of frustration. So in that sense, in terms of a specific sort of math sense, I don't see it as a good outcome.
Yeah, that's great. And I also I I love this idea of diving in even more into the motivation and gamification stuff. Um, Maybe participants drop a heart if you want to hear another webinar where we actually interview somebody about that because I would love um I want to look at your references. I want to I want to figure out who we bring in next because this point about like being the little guy, like I am tired of curriculum associates being the big guy. I think we need to do our best as parents, not just to fight for change within our districts and for our kids, but we want to platform individuals like you who are bringing the science back into data-based instruction, right? Like there is a difference between data-based and data-driven. Like I want to throw my full support behind things that work, right? And I know that timely formative assessment followed by intentional differentiated instruction and small group instruction is essential to learning. I also think that it is ridiculous. Any company thinks that the iReady My Path is going to do that, right? And I think this is we've spent most of the conversation today talking about these beginning of year, middle of year, end of year assessments. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on those instructional minutes and instructional tools as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because I do a lot of class-wide math interventions, both actually small group and class-wide math interventions in schools. That's part of my main research agenda. And when we do those studies, we have students usually under explicit time conditions, very brief, intensive, but focused and low stakes. And then we score them and provide the students the data, and they love it. We do goal setting, we do performance feedback. You got, 10 problems right today. Tomorrow you're going to go for 12. Okay, I understand 10. I understand what 12 is. They really enjoy that feedback. And so in these computer adaptive programs where that feedback isn't provided in a very clearly understandable way, you know, that again drives that confusion. I would argue the stuff we do drives down math anxiety because students are going, wait, this is irrefutable proof I'm getting better at math. I see it. Here's a score. This score is better than I did yesterday. I'm really fast at this now. I have a number to associate with it. That's how we drive down math anxieties by building students' confidence. These programs don't really provide it. So to go back to your question about sort of, instruction, I think as far as I understand iReady, there really is a misalignment with between iReady and learning science, right? So let's go to the science of reading for a second, right? There
Mm,
was that's a grassroots movement, but it was fueled by a compilation of really important, really critical, and really high quality studies done over a half century. And through that half century, they figured out a number of things are really important to bringing up to 98% of kids to benchmark on literacy. One, you need really high quality explicit instruction. You need lots of opportunities to respond. You need clear models. You need practice, right? You need acquisitional activities. You need fluency activities. You need to adjust instruction, as you were saying, based on formative data. These are not things that are present in iReady. It's, and that's, at the end of the day, all that matters is, show us the data, but alignment also can give us a few good hints here. And there is a fundamental misalignment between the structure of iReady and what we know about instructional and learning science, in terms of programs that do evoke good outcomes.
hmm
So it's not entirely unexpected that we're not seeing huge gains from students on these high stakes tests based on their exposure to iReady because it misaligns with learning science. You need a teacher up there. A computer can't replace a teacher, especially when kids are learning new things,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. I want to just say it again. A computer cannot replace a teacher. A program, an algorithm cannot replace a teacher. That's the heart of all of this, I think. And this is where it's like I again keep coming back to what real research looks like, what real science looks like, what the science of learning looks like, and how disappointed I am with our school district and with many school districts across the country for making choices and pivoting to a kind of instruction that is just not data backed, right? And doing so in this they're not even piloting at a few schools. It's we are going to sign this contract. We are signing our hours of student time away with the hope that what they say is true. Um, And oftentimes really ignoring like the decades of established learning sciences, child development theory, socio-emotional relational benefits of having a human. Like it's wild that we're having this conversation now instead of before rolling this out into so
Yeah.
many 5-year-olds' hands.
So I think one of the best courses they can add to, I mean, obviously you're a teacher trainer, so obviously there's a huge amount teachers need to know, and you're trying to pack it into a few years. And I'm not going to pretend I understand the challenge in that, but I tend to find schools are very knowledge deficient in research methods. They may be outstanding in other areas. I, my wife is an excellent teacher. I can only aspire to be as good as she is. But, what I find is that in most schools, there's a lack of understanding of research methods. And so that makes these schools very naive to a good salesman, right? What I try to teach my students is to be skeptical consumers of these products based on the science, right? So my students go through multiple research methods course so they can review these white papers, they can review these program evaluations, they can talk to the sales rep and be like, okay, talk to me here. Tell me about your RCTs. How big were they? Which students did they involve? What are your effect sizes? Those are the questions
Mhm.
schools, and it's not their fault. Those are the questions schools don't even know enough to ask.
Right. And so one of the, schools beyond screens, parent supporting teacher, we're very involved right now in this LAUSD fight to we got an amazing resolution passed. We're working on pushing the district to actually get all of the things we want into some policy that we can implement in the fall. And one of the things that we're asking for is that as decisions are being made about new contracts, new curriculum, new software programs, et cetera, that we are actually consulting independent experts in the field. To me, this feels so common sense. Every district, every school should have somebody on speed dial who understands research because
Got it.
I mean, administration is a completely different skill level that I do not have. Like, I'm not an administrator, but I understand research, right? That's okay. We don't need every school administrator to go back for their PhD and understand research methods, but we do want them to be able to pick up a phone and ask somebody for an independent perspective on something before we push it onto our teachers. This kind of goes into our last question that I also saw come up in the chat about like if parents want to get more involved in advocating for reducing screen-based instruction or diagnostic testing, what are a couple talking points or chunks of evidence from your research or your practice that you would really want them to help amplify?
Oh, that's a good question. I think from my research, um, I would hope that parents take away that computer adaptive tests can be useful in certain circumstances. However, they are, I think at this point we can safely say they're very much overused, and we need to promote data rather than computer adaptive tests, which simply identify a risk. We need to promote data sources that can inform decision making and can identify students' strengths, knowledge-based strengths and weaknesses. And again, curriculum-based measurement is a great way to do that. It's been shown to do those things. Teachers who have been trained to use that data have been shown to make better decisions. So we need to advocate for decision points, for assessment points that actually have been experimentally shown to lead to better decisions, and we should demand that of the vendors as well. So on a purely assessment perspective, I would say that's the big ticket one. On the instructional intervention side, obviously that's a whole nother thing, but there's very little evidence that these screen-based programs, although they might be useful in very limited, very focused, very circumscribed ways, right? For example, there may be, I've seen computer-based fluency programs where I have that are done 4 or 5 minutes a day, and that are very focused and not gamified,
Mm,
and present present math problems one by one in plain black and white font on the screen. I've seen I've seen good outcomes for some of those programs, okay? But the bottom line is that when we look at these major vendors and their big programs, we see very little evidence. And I'm really hoping parents, because it really depends on parents, right? That was the science of reading, right? Movement. It was a grassroots movement that was driven effectively by parents. We need that on the desperately. We need that on the math side. We need parents going into school board meetings, talking to their administrators politely, but forcefully, saying like, "Hey, you need show me the the checks here. Show me that this works. Show me the high stakes data that that has improved as a result of this program going in. And if not, you need to pull it back."
That's awesome. Thank you. I could talk to you for hours. But Nicole, I'm going to let you take over for a bit and share out some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. Is that all right?
Yeah, I mean, some of these questions in here, you all so amazingly thoughtful, this stuff, and really already thinking ahead to next steps, which I appreciate. Um, oh, okay. And then Joe here, there's a few people who are actually preparing to speak to school boards in their various cities across the country. It looks like we have people from, Massachusetts, different parts of California.
Oh, great.
Yeah, no, it's really, really wonderful. And I guess what folks are asking are like, what would be like the three most important points they could offer to school boards when they speak, in defense of doing teaching and not hopping on the computers?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's gotten easier because again, it's all great stuff. There's been a lot of recent attention on technology in schools. So it's sort of, I'm hard pressed to anyone, especially on a school board, hasn't seen some Substack or some LinkedIn or some tweet, um, that links to the digital delusion or related piece. So I think it's on everyone's sort of back burner, which is a good thing. They're sort of primed. But I would say the three questions you probably want to ask a school board or leading questions, if you will, is, well, I mean, let's just start with the obvious one. Show me the data that this program has led to better outcomes in your school. And if they pull up the iReady reports, say that's not what I'm asking about. That's that's the vendor's data. They can say anything. Show me the state test scores or show me some external criterion that convincingly demonstrates that since this program has been introduced, student test scores have gone up and haven't just, and show me for different quartiles, right? In particular, show me that our most struggling learners have improved as a result of this program. Because if anything, I bet that bottom 50%, it are, if I doubt anyone's doing better, but if anyone's doing better, it's the kids that were most well prepared for it in the first place. It's not the bottom 50th or even the bottom 75th percentile. Show me that that gap is closed. Show me that those kids are now closer to the high kids based on the result of this program. Because for most people, it's been in now 3, 4, 5 years. So we should be seeing results at this time. And that's the money question right there. And I guess the second question, just to rehash what we've already discussed, is with iReady, can you produce valid data based on rigorous experimentation that this vendor has engaged in, right? That demonstrates that would make it seem or make it very likely that this program would work in our district. Those are two questions. I don't know if we need a third. Those are two big ones.
Yeah, and
The
I mean,
first.
I feel like we would be remiss not to say, like, go look at our website. So if you are joining this call today and you are not already a Schools Beyond Screens member, please go sign up. We have chapters across the country. Parent supporting teacher, is it mostly focused on LA or is it kind of across?
We're mostly Los Angeles,
Okay.
30,000 just here
Right.
in LA.
Yeah, so schoolsbeyondscreens.com, we do have, talking points to bring to your school board. We have monthly working groups. I feel like if there's is Leela still on the call? I'm like, I can highlight somebody else, unmute somebody else to give the full overview of everything that we do. But this, I mean, this is a force of of volunteer parents of kids who are just frustrated with how difficult it is to get big tech out of our children's education, right? So there are tons of resources there for you. Um, I'll also share that in LA, so like got I got interested in SBS and pulled into SBS because we did an iReady opt-out. So the first thing that we did at our school, we had a group of very engaged, passionate volunteer parents. Uh, we got 143 letters requesting to opt out of the MyPath minutes. And we waited to deliver them as a chunk. We delivered them publicly at the school board meeting so they couldn't get lost. And it drove pretty quick change with the district saying, okay, like we do need a system to say
I, I,
what happens,
I
right?
like that. That was a good move.
It was good. And then, I mean, simultaneously, there are other parents at other schools just across the district who have been advocating for similar things, running similar campaigns, and a lot of parents going and speaking at the board meetings. We had a lot of calling and pestering particular school board meetings, especially during election season, and really driving a lot of real policy change. So, God willing, hopefully, by the end of this month, LAUSD is voting on this new intentional tech policy for the next school year. And we hope that that becomes a game plan for the rest of the country because when big companies and big money are trying to take over our schools, people power. The only thing that can fight against big tech is big, angry parent people power.
And you're dealing with again you're dealing with two phenomena here. One, you're dealing with school board members that are very well intended for the most part, and are doing the best they can, but they're not research methodologists, so they don't know what they don't know.
Hmm.
So it tends to make these boards very naive and trusting of administrators who also often are very naive on these things because they just don't have the expertise to scrutinize this stuff. You have that on one side, and on the other side, you have sunken cost, right? You have administrators that have put
Yep.
tens of thousands, if not more, of dollars into these programs. They're not going to want to readily admit, even if, again, I think it's forgivable. I understand they're not going to want to be like, oops, my bad. So you're going to have to get over that hump of people that are going to try to defend their track record over the last 3 to 5 years and the enormous instructional time cost and financial cost they put into these programs.
Hmm.
That's awesome. Is Jody on the call or is Leela on the call?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, cool. Can I pin you to talk about the national kind of SBS growth a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as Alicia mentioned, SBS is expanding nationally into chapters, and we are providing a whole bunch of resources for parents to get started in advocacy within your district. I included the resource library that has a ton of articles and research and a bunch of templates and public comment speeches that you can pick up and leverage within your area. We can get you signed up as a Schools Beyond Screens chapter, and what that means is we'll get you listed on our website. We're working on creating some functionality that'll allow you to stand up a microsite really quickly to help connect with parents. We're also bringing in independent parent organizations. So there are tons of groups across the country that are doing this work. And so we are banding together as a network and making sure that we're connecting parents within work that's already happening. So if you're interested in becoming an affiliate group or a chapter group, please be sure to get in touch with us and we can get you set up with that. I also lead a working group call that meets on the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. Our next call is actually tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific time. And that's a place for advocates across the country to come online, meet together, talk about a specific topic, and just ask each other questions and find support. So Tomorrow, we're featuring the Schools Beyond Screens National Press Director. She's going to be talking about how to engage local media in your efforts. And so it's going to be a really great discussion. So I'll be sure to put a link to that registration in the chat as well.
That sounds great.
All right, that's awesome. Nicole, do you have any other questions that you want to boost?
Let me take a quick look. Miserable students, students who've tested out.
Something that just came in that I think would actually be really fun. So
Hmm.
Joe put in, if we have time, I'd love to hear Dr. Solomon's sale pitch in favor of iReady and then his dismantling of the sales pitch. The reason why I asked this question is because I think it'll help to prepare and inoculate advocates when we speak with school boards about iReady.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a hard time generating a sales pitch. Although I do love the question. You know, I haven't been in the room when one of these sales pitches has occurred, so I don't want to, again, be present myself as more as knowing more than I do. But my understanding is that when they make these sales pitches, again, we're going to end up back at the same point. They talk about all the levels that their students have previously improved on, right? And so they show this student was at level 3 and now he's at level I'm making these numbers up, at level 27, right? Our program, when we introduce our program, students rapidly. So yeah, here's what you do. They make two, oftentimes not iRay specifically, but just anytime I've seen these pitches, they do two things. They predict they make obtuse statements about their product. So they provide overly general statements that don't relate to specific findings or studies. They just talk about how great it is and how they've seen these different, they've seen these all these different improvements. They lean on their testimonials. You see that a ton. Hey, I'm going to have you talk to this school over here. Look how much they've improved. We don't know if they've improved. They just like it, right? So they bring up all these testimonials from prior customers, right? And then again, they lean on the evidence that they've developed within house. And so if you're going to rebut that, it's pretty easy. You can say, hey, that's all well and good. I'm so glad you have happy customers all over the place. I don't really care whether they're happy or not. I care about whether the students have objectively learned something. Can you present to me independent studies that have looked at high stakes outcomes, that have been shown to connect iReady to those improved outcomes? Do you have do you have randomized control trials? Because we do them in education all the time. It's not a super high bar. Do you have randomized control trials that demonstrate that your product convincingly improves objective math performance? And most of these salespeople, they're not scientists, they're not researchers, they're salespeople. They are run on commissions. So they're trained in their pitch, but as soon as you push them off pitch, often I hope I'm wrong. You may find one that's actually very knowledgeable, and that's wonderful. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement on all salespeople. I'm sure some are knowledgeable, but generally speaking, you're most of them, as soon as you push them off course, they're going to struggle with that question. So that's sort of an easy way to do it. And if they can answer it convincingly, great. That's more evidence for selecting that product. There are vendors that come equipped. I'm not going to name them here because this is not a call intended for me to push a specific product. And there are vendors that I've worked with or that I'm knowledgeable or just collegial with that come with their data in hand. They're ready to convince you with valid data and studies that can convincingly demonstrate that their product leads to improved outcomes. They're out there, but obviously they're unfortunately the exception, not the rule.
I also just want to add in here too, like join the Schools Beyond Screens groups, start a chapter in your area, be a part of this national movement, and also make sure when it's time to vote for school board that you're making choices of actual folks, actual educators who have been in classrooms, who have seen all these trends come and go, who have been at the whim of district policy for a good amount of time, and who are interested in actually focusing on the relationships happening at schools that actually improve student learning, right? Like we've got to elect people who are interested in centering those relationships and who have felt the impact of policies like bringing in iReady.
And
Just my two
I've
cents.
I love
and I've worked with a number of school boards. And what I often find is you get someone who obviously isn't like a research methodologist, but they have really good analytical skills and just call it they have a really good sense of smell. So for example, I've worked with school boards where maybe someone is a lawyer, so they have a really good sort of analytical headset. And they're like, something doesn't smell right with this. And they'll call me. They'll find me and they'll call me and be like, I have a suspicion, but let me talk to you so I can get the language. Um, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a professor or a methodologist on the school board, but you need someone who just is skeptical but open, right? Skeptical but open, who is willing to sort of, who's going to be demanding of seeing data or just asking really good questions.
So you're saying there are school boards that are reaching out to experts in the field when they want to make a decision about buying a
Yeah.
gigantic digital curriculum for their schools. That's so
Yeah.
cool. That's so cool.
Yeah. I,
I'm
I
not
wish it
jealous
happened
at
more
all.
often.
I love that. All right.
Yeah.
I really try to respect people's time. Do we have any closing words, Dr. Solomon?
Um, Not many. Thank you so much for having me. I really love seeing these discussions where, there's good, scientific questions being asked, amongst the public, because everyone has a stake in education, whether you're a parent or not. Um, I like that we're asking really tough questions of these vendors because they make a lot of money and it's their responsibility to demonstrate their product works. So this is just even, for me, the researcher who's sitting in my little lab doing my thing and is hoping, one or my studies has an effect on someone, this
Yeah.
is very energizing. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
I know that feeling. And we'll put that out to the rest of the academic field. If you want to do research on this, please get in touch. If you're doing research, if your kids are like, I don't know what my dissertation should be. Hey, maybe they want to look at ed tech. Maybe they want to figure out what actually works in schools. Put us in touch. Thank you so, so much. I know there's a ton of love and appreciation coming in for you from the chat. And Nicole, are there any last words from you?
No, just everybody keep on pushing, hang in there. Remember, we're all in this together. It's a marathon and not a sprint, you know?
Mm. When we fight, we win. All right. Thanks everyone for being here. Have a
Thanks.
lovely Tuesday evening. See you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.